Hello, everyone. I am Lorraine Nolan, and I would like to welcome you all out there in audience land to my talk. And this evening, we're going to be discussing are millennial Black women and Gen Z Black women captured by transgender ideology or not? And with me, my distinguished panel here, we have Lyons, who is a writer and historian from the Gulf Coast of Texas. And then we have Southern writer and mom, Kristen Zambrowski, and she runs the Substack, The PT Perspective. And we also have our two distinguished guests, Dahlia and Elle. So, are are the Black women of these younger generations captured? And then we're thinking specifically of millennial Black women and Gen Z. Um, because again, I'm Generation X, and in my generation, we didn't really have the proliferation of gender identity ideology like we do now. Of course, people who believe they were the opposite sex definitely did exist. But we call them, or they refer to themselves also as transsexuals, and people call them transvestites, but it really just wasn't like it is now. So, um, are Gen Z and millennial Black women captured or not? Aja.
Well, hello, Lorraine, and thank you so much for organizing this, getting us together. Like always, thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Um, so I want to say, in thinking about, I think I'm an elder millennial, or maybe born in 1990. And so I was of the generation that saw Jerry Springer and the titles of Tranny this and Wild Wild Trannies. Um, and so when you mentioned people who've always thought themselves the opposite sex, there were still linguistic boundaries.
Hmm.
There were still linguistic and social boundaries. No, these people like to present themselves in public as the opposite sex, but they never denied their sex.
Hmm.
The word tranny was kind of commonplace. I don't feel that it was the slur that it is now.
Right.
Um, that perception. But no, we had, the drag queens. There was still sort of this taboo adult element. But I remember, and I was raised by um, Catholic and Protestant Black people who
Hmm.
still sat and watched movies like The Birdcage, and Tu Wong Fu. Thanks for everything, Julie Newmar. And they have it around us kids. And they're like, yeah, I was a little worried about it, but then like this is still okay. It's still fun. It's camp. It's seen as dress up. And so many of us grew up with, friends and uncles and aunts who were gay. And I think many of us perceive it as the switch to these people need to have more rights and have um, language used that is more respectful to who they are, respect how they want to show up in the world and be
Yes.
engaged. These are our family and our friends. The difference is your feminine gay uncle who, maybe likes to dress up in women's clothing and wear makeup and such, but still wasn't being sexual around you or
Right.
other children, wasn't telling uh, children to distance themselves from their parents or to
Right.
go off and get drugs and have surgeries when they're still little kids. That is the difference. These people were
Hmm.
actual uncles, aunts, friends, and had boundaries.
Right.
Um, and they weren't pushing any sort of ideology onto people. When you
Hmm.
have porn sick men who are now major CEOs, who are now major power wielders, these
Right.
are not, the gay uncles and lesbian aunts who worked at a corner store and,
Wow.
sent pizza to your house on the weekends.
Wow. Wow. That's absolutely. I totally agree. It's Kristen, would you like to add anything to that?
So I'm a millennial, and I think that Tumblr, it isn't the only factor, but it was a big factor, especially for younger millennials and Gen Z. I was probably one of the older people on there. I was in my mid 20s on Tumblr, and there was definitely a culture of question your preferences, which
Mm.
quickly morphed into question your boundaries. And I think a fear that discomfort meant that you were prudish or prejudiced led to a
Mm,
lot of young people, including Black women, accepting this ideology even when it didn't quite sit right with them. And I
right.
experienced some of that myself, even though I was one of the older people on the platform.
Hmm.
But I guess common sense and lived experiences gave me the confidence to say, no, that's a hard boundary where things
Hmm.
weren't comfortable for me or where I wasn't going to go along with something. And
Right.
I think that it's probably harder for people who are younger who didn't have those foundations of lived experiences to say no and
Hmm.
to disagree without feeling like they were a bad person.
Right. I totally agree. This movement definitely does seem like a covert way to accept violating women's boundaries.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not necessarily going to say, at least at this time, that that's like the whole goal, like, from jump, but it definitely does have elements of violating women's boundaries and making it acceptable to violate women's boundaries. And once they
Also, young
violate women's,
people.
yes, and then children. Because if a child can decide they are the opposite sex, what else can that child agree to? And that is that's the evil part.
Mhm.
Elle or Dahlia, would you like to add anything?
Well, I'm more Gen X, so I didn't come. I've been on Tumblr, but I hadn't experienced any of that. But
Mm,
my experiences came later, after college, and getting in more into feminism and getting on these different feminism websites and
mhm,
realizing that they were very pro-trans,
mhm.
pro pronouns,
Yep.
pro um names, and all
Mhm.
these different things. And I thought, oh, well, that's what we're doing now.
Yes. Sure is.
And
Mhm.
all the feminism, I was gonna say mainstream feminism or liberal feminism, as they say.
Mhm.
That's what those websites were doing, and so I'm like, oh, this is the next thing that we're
Yep.
supposed to be doing, being kind, including everybody, until I realized that was not the case.
Exactly. Exactly. Elle, would you like to add anything to this particular part?
Yeah, I think I agree with what all of the women have said. I think one key thing that does stand out to me amongst the Gen Z group, and why I feel like a lot of Gen Z women have taken up the cause for this movement, is also the grouping of the different movements that we've had, such as maybe whether it's like gay rights, women's rights, so grouping it together with gay rights and women's rights and any others, immigrants' rights, etc. So because it's grouped along with those other rights, I think a lot of Gen Z women feel like if I am against this, then I must be homophobic or I must be racist, I must be
Mhm.
misogynistic, as opposed to actually looking at the arguments for this movement and separating it from what it's grouped together as. So I think that is why a lot of Gen Z women are really going up for this movement, is because going against it means that, according to them, they may be like also homophobic, misogynistic,
Mm.
racist against Black women because it's been coupled so many times with Black women as well.
Right. And all of those terms like racist, bigot, Nazi, they carry such power. And it's this forced teaming. I don't know if we anybody else remember, like with the Black Women's Caucus statement, the forced teaming that this movement is actually doing. And that just brings me to the next part of the question. What are some of the factors contributing to Gen Z and millennial Black women just, being forced to accept this ideology? Does anyone else have anything to add?
I'd like to piggyback off of what Dahlia said, because I also remember when I was deep in Tumblr, I was also deep in everyday feminism,
Mhm.
and they were also very woke and they were very on the trans train.
Mm. Wow. Wow. Not
I'm
surprised.
not
Not
sure if they're still that way. I haven't been there in probably 10 years, but yeah,
right.
if
Right.
you were a feminist, it meant that you went along with this trans stuff, basically.
Mhm. Yep. And that's exactly the way it seemed. And the ones who aren't, they're, the slur turf
Yes.
is being used against us. But anyway, Aja, did you want to say something?
Yes, just to piggyback off of Kristen and Dahlia, I remember I used to be incredibly active in abortion rights, pro-choice causes
Mm,
in the 2010s, and that's when I started to hear the language, the forced teaming, the social justice speak, the leftist speak.
mm,
Um, of I remember calling out on a social media post, like just supporting, shouting out this organization that said all the wonderful women of this, these abortion rights activists, and I got a response of not all of us are women or not everybody in this is a
mm.
woman, and it's like. Oh, can you let me know more about this? And I'm thinking they're going to say, oh, well, we have this guy who's doing this. We're gonna. No, they meant some of them identified as non-binary, and it's like, but what? Like we're all women talking about women's health issues. I'm so and then I attended. I'm not sure if it still goes on. The Civil Liberties and Public Policy Conference held in Massachusetts. Well, I think we all know how politics are in Massachusetts.
Yes, yes.
Um, and this was primarily about again civil liberties and public policy. And so a lot of it was about abortion rights, but they extended that to other aspects of women's rights and women's needs, such as, housing,
Mm,
incarcerated women. So all these other things that I guess you could say might not be seemingly connected, but when you talk about layers of women's subjugation, American women's subjugation, all these other factors. So yes, we need to talk about, uh, housing the homeless. We need to talk about all these other things
yeah.
when talking about women's health care. And yet there was a man there who was dressed and pretended to be a woman, what many would refer to as a trans woman. And I
Mm,
thought, wait, but now you're losing me here. So wait a minute. He can't get pregnant.
mm.
What's going on here? And the wheels weren't turning for me yet, but that's when we started to see this in greater numbers, I feel, because when
Mm.
I feel like when I first started out in the later 2000s, this wasn't as prominent a thing. And this wasn't to where you would get banned from the lesbian potlucks if you
Right.
started saying, oh, no, no, we're not going to have a man come to our hangout.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add to these points? Okay, so again, sitting here with Gen Z and millennial Black women, you were all able to resist it, or maybe you were, trapped into it at one time, believing in it, but now it seems like you've come into the light, come into the truth, so to speak. How were you able to resist gender identity ideology and just supporting it? And how do you think other millennial and Gen Z Black women might be able to resist it as well? We can just chime in at this point.
For me, there was a case, I believe, in Idaho, where a man who had raped a teenage boy was suing to get sex reassignment surgery
Mm,
for the state to pay for it. And I remember going to a trans-identified female friend of mine, being like, this story is crazy.
mm.
And this person, who was the most meek and mild person I knew, literally cussed me out for being against it.
Oh my
Up
God.
until that point, I'd started to get a little bit of turf fever. But even then, I was like, the ones I know aren't like the ones you see online. And it
Mhm.
was that moment that I'm like, oh, wait, are they all like this? Like it's like no trans person can do wrong or be held
Mhm.
accountable for it.
Yep.
I
Yep.
think for a lot of Black women, our reality often interrupts the ideology. We have families and communities that are strong in a culture of plain speaking and calling things as they are.
Hmm.
And that can provide a very needed reality check. And
Right.
also, I think Black women know what it's like to stand out already. So
Mm.
there's definitely a cultural instinct of, I don't understand why someone would voluntarily take on an identity that makes them even more socially marginal and more dependent on the affirmation of the people around them. Like we know that that isn't a glamorous thing to stick out
Wow.
and to choose that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add? How have you been able to resist it? And how can other Gen Z and millennial Black women resist this ideology?
Um, well, I did not resist it at first. It
Hmm.
came later, um, when somebody mentioned that, hey, wait a minute, they're trying to erase women. And I was like, what are you talking about? Nobody's trying to erase anybody. Until I started researching and finding out that the so-called rights of men who are wanting to be women are
Hmm.
not the rights are not shared. They're not rights, first of all, they're privileges, and they're
Yeah,
not shared.
yeah.
And so that made me start thinking. And then, of course, when I started asking questions, then I got a little bit of pushback on that.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's like the rights, there's privileges that these men want,
Hmm.
but the rest of us want rights and
Hmm.
want to keep rights because our rights are, you have to make sure that they are continuous, you have to be
Right,
vigilant and make sure you can keep them. And
right,
at this point, they're not trying to help us keep anything.
right, right, right. Absolutely. I totally agree. They're not. They're not, but they want us to help them get more privileges than they already have. Okay, so on that note, what are the ways that TRAs attempt to trap or guilt Black women? Now, we already went into this earlier. Now, this thinking about if you want to discuss more of what we talked about earlier, that's fine. But I wanted to throw something else in there that you all are probably familiar with. This fake or another forced teaming of connecting Black women's experiences with men who think they are the opposite sex. It's like making Black women the face of violating women's boundaries. But again, they're trying to say, well, if Black women are women, then why can't we be women? You know, all of those things. Does anybody want to comment on that monstrosity?
It's implicature, it's intellectual dishonesty, it's just plain idiocy.
Hmm.
But what they're doing is weaponizing the many ways Black women have been dehumanized and degraded and been shifted into subhuman categories
Hmm.
to negate the lack of humanity for those who would oppress us and harm us,
Hmm.
such as the men who have to say, well, no, they're not really women. Um, well, if we're not really women, we're not really human,
Hmm.
then would make you some kind of sicko when you sexually, violate us.
Wow. Yeah.
Um, or literally steal our body parts or use us as medical experimentation. Um, so that's what that is. And the dehumanization, the masculinization, the crossing to the other and such, but it is not the same thing as a man who chooses to
Hmm.
present in a way that is outside of what is stereotypical for his sex, but
Hmm.
a man pretending to be a woman and will use, will argue that, well, no, look at how tall he is. Yet
Yes.
tall women are still not the same as a man.
Exactly. Exactly.
A woman who maybe has a disorder of sexual development or has, certain organs removed for healthcare reasons, is still not a man. Her body is
Hmm.
still on that same soul developmental pathway
Hmm.
that makes a human being a woman.
Yep.
And so it's simple intellectual dishonesty and just bullshit.
Right.
Because they can, and
Exactly.
because they're men, because they're privileged, what they say, their perception, their perspective is seen as the absolute truth.
Hmm. Right. And Dahlia, I remember a couple of years ago, when we were discussing this, you made the statement, you know, if Black women are going to allow themselves to be guilted or trapped by, oh, well, if Black women are women, well, Black women, they're denied femininity. Why perpetuate that further by adopting an ideology that basically, says that you're less than, a woman? Well, why perpetuate that? So that's something that always stuck with me, Dahlia.
Right.
Kristen, did you want
Yeah.
to? Mhm.
Yeah, it's like I don't understand that logic of if this does all these harmful things, why would you adopt it for yourself?
Hmm.
And like that you're they're saying that we're men
Mm-hmm.
based on whether we have facial hair, how tall we are, how hairy we are,
Mm-hmm.
how deep our voices are. And it's like, and they're telling that to our faces. You
Mm-hmm.
can go on social media and actually see those things, but yet and still we're over here like, trans women are women, trans women are women. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, they don't even think you're a woman yourself. What are you doing?
Wow. It's so true, and it's annoying, and I'm sorry, but I think it's racist
It
when
is.
people equate the two. It is because again, I'm Gen X, I'm well past 50. It has never, and you can see I'm dark skinned. It has never, ever, ever in my life been my experience that someone either thought I was a man, even when I shaved my head. I've never had my, sex question. People always knew what I was. And even with other black women that I know who are my age and even some that are older, it has never ever come up in conversation of being mistaken for a man or, your womanhood question. Now, of course, there might people that might, talk about, the way we look and all that kind of stuff, but that's still not the same thing of being mistaken for a man or being told that you are male. So it's like I don't know, this is a trigger for black women. The whole femininity, the beauty issue, it's a trigger for black women, and it's, that I think they're using it on purpose to try to guilt us. Just one way that I came up with. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to that point.
In 2021, the WNBA had their first WNBA Pride, and
Hmm.
their first Woman Crush Wednesday was two Black trans-identified males. So not even Black womanhood being used to push this, but the, I guess, caricature of the image of a Black woman
Hmm.
portrayed by these two Black males was used to push that message, shoehorn transgenderism into WNBA Pride. And also, there's also the erasure of lesbian and bisexual women who were actually in the league for these
Yes.
two men who are not in the league.
Hmm.
And
Exactly.
yeah, so it's not even Black womanhood, but
Yeah.
even like the farce of pretending to be or look like or pass as Black womanhood that's being used to shoehorn this into the mainstream.
Right. Wow. And because we don't have, nearly as much power as, the seat of power does, they're succeeding a little bit. But I will say this, light at the end of the tunnel. There's a young black woman on Substack. I know the first part of her name is MC. And she made a post or a note today about how she's noticing a lot of black women are peaking and coming out and speaking more. And I actually agree. I'm starting to see more and more black people, black women speaking out against gender identity ideology online. And that's just so, that just warms my heart. And I just want, more of us to do that. So on that note, is it safe for Black women to speak out, whether socially, professionally? What are, if any, um, the risks of speaking out, and how can we overcome those risks?
I think that we unfortunately risk losing the so-called allies that were never truly our allies since they don't support us saying and doing things that don't fit their narrative for us. They're very narrow perspectives. But the reality is I and many others have lost a lot. Unfortunately, I've even lost Black community, um, Black women who are on the very far left, who are trans rights activists, see certain posts or comments and have completely shunned and blacklisted me from Black women's spaces and community.
Mm,
White people who are in power and authority who support this ideology, they can and will bully you, but even um, limit opportunities, professional engagements and opportunities. I know there have been spaces that I've been excluded socially and professionally because people are so afraid of me
mm,
saying something or doing something to hurt this trans identifying person's feelings, even though I've never ever, and I am 5'1"
Mm,
and I wear a size small. I am the least intimidating person in the room, and yet I'm still vilified as this scary, mean, aggressive individual that's going to hurt the poor, fragile
hmm.
tranny's feelings.
That's horrible. So you were basically ostracized, not because you committed a crime, not because you hurt a man, woman, or a child, because you don't believe that a man can get pregnant. I just want to, bring it out to, so to put it all in perspective. That is just terrible. And I want people to think about that. Just because you believe that, in women's sex-based rights, you believe that, women are women and sex is unchangeable. That is why people are ostracizing others. Where have we come to in this society? Anyone else?
I think it's important to remember that silence has a cost too. The goal isn't to pretend that speaking up against this isn't going to have consequences, but it should be to become independent enough that disagreement doesn't feel like exile.
Hmm. Right. That's true. Look, that's another aspect. Silence, I think silence costs a lot more. I mean, can you imagine if this ideology just really, just becomes the law of the land? Silence definitely costs a lot more. Absolutely,
Yeah,
I agree.
we definitely have to think of the girls who are coming up after us.
Hmm. We sure do. Elle or Dahlia?
I think
I do think
socially,
silent. Oop, go
go ahead,
ahead.
Dahlia. I was just gonna say that I think socially, um, it might be slightly safer now than it was a couple of years ago. It's very small.
Hmm.
But more women are speaking up, and hopefully more women will be more comfortable to speak up so that more women do speak up. That sounded like a tongue twister.
Hmm.
But I think professionally, I still think it is not safe for Black women to speak up.
Yeah.
They just don't have the power. And especially right now with everything that's going on, with everything like with the government, unfortunately, it's not safe for Black women to speak up yet.
Wow, that's true. That's true. This just reminded me of like we have the basketball player Sophie Cunningham. Whatever people feel about Sophie Cunningham, she did speak up. And she's getting backlash, but she also has support. And then if anybody else remembers Coco Gauff, I hope I'm saying her name correctly. Please forgive me, Coco, if I'm not. Um, she tried to speak up, but I noticed she said that there's no way to really say this without people twisting it around and coming at you. And based on that, you can tell what she really believes, but she just thought she's not. I guess she doesn't have the Calvary behind her so that she can say it. So it's definitely true. Um, any final comment? Or I'm sorry, Dahlia, I think you wanted to say something. You were going to say something?
I'm gonna agree with Elle. I think it's still not particularly safe, especially if you have a very prominent job or even if you have a job in general, because it's just like you say one thing and somebody it is so rabid and so over the top and so cutthroat
Mm-hmm.
that they're willing to try to get your job taken from you, your
Yeah,
livelihood taken from you. And it's like that that type of thing is bad. Nobody looks at that and says, "Hold up, that's crossing the line here. We
right.
may not disagree, but we don't have to do that, or we may
Exactly.
not agree, but we don't have to do that."
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So that's so true. And that's probably, in addition to like them just pushing gender identity ideology, that's one issue that just burns blood, makes my blood boil, this whole canceling thing. And even some employers that are going along with it. Just this is terrible. It's wrong. Any final thoughts for Gen Z women or millennial Black women? Any final thoughts that we want to add?
I think that given Black women's history in this country, having to fight for our civil rights in feminist spaces and having to fight for our sex-based rights in Black spaces, we should be especially wary of any politics that asks us to disappear into someone else's cause. because
Mm.
solidarity without boundaries just becomes self-erasure.
Wow. One thing I like about Kristen as a speaker, like she's always bringing in or, developing these memorable lines, disappearing into, oh my gosh, thank you so much for saying that. Anybody else? Any final thoughts? That's
Um,
okay. Oh, yes, Aja.
there is a reason they drag us into it. There's a reason they're not dragging women of other races into it. There's a reason they're not centering, or they're not using, disabled women as taglines.
Hmm.
They're using Black women, and they know that because
Yes.
at the end of the day, we have been placed at the bottom of the totem pole and
Hmm.
being recognized as the foundation for every aspect of American society as we are. And
Hmm.
so do not play into it. Unfortunately, no one really has our back. And so we
Right.
have to try and have each other's.
Hmm.
And it is very hard, and it is very painful. But
Yep.
even with all of this, we have to leave space and grace for each other, for Black
Yes.
women. I'd like to believe that, unfortunately, the vitriol that we see and experience from other Black women when it comes to this gender ideology is
Hmm.
because Black women can be so loving and so compassionate, and they see this as supporting other vulnerable, marginalized people.
Yes. Right. Right. And I think that's probably one of the main things that, in addition to, like the femininity question, these people are also marginalized. You should know how it feels. Wow. My last thought is, for, Black women, all people, men and women, please keep speaking up. Because this may seem like it's innocent and harmless, but it's not. Keep speaking up. We have to live in truth and not delusions. Thank you.